Alrighty, I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order, May 20th, 2019. Hala, please call the roll.
Mr. Frazier.
Present.
Ms. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Labutus.
Here.
Mr. Lang.
Present.
Mr. Marmee.
Present.
Mr. Rath.
Here.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Bug.
Here.
Mr. Cost.
Here.
And Mr. Fennell.
Here.
We have all here this evening. If you please rise for the invocation by Mr. Blake, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
You bow your heads. Heavenly Lord, we come to this place to gather to make decisions on behalf of the people of Newark. May you give us strength and guidance to do the best that we can to our ability. May you always also remember that Memorial Day is approaching, and remember the significance of that day and those that have given their lives to honor this country and to give us our freedoms. With all these blessings we ask and thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Blake. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Blake. Next on the agenda we have caucus. That's the time for the council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything? Okay. We'll move on to the minutes of our May 6, 2019 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lang. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have 3 reports this evening from standing committees, one from Finance, one from Service, and one from Capital Improvements. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Under reports from city officials, we have one tonight from our auditor, Stephen Johnson, who is here this evening. It's the operating report for the period ending April 30th, 2019. Without objection, that will be received and filed. We have no communications this evening. Next we have on the agenda is our comments from citizens. This is time for you to be heard. This is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to tell us what's on your mind. Do we have anyone for this first section? Have anyone else for this first section? Okay, just give us your name and address for the record.
David McElfresh, 153 North 39th Street, Newark, Ohio.
Hi, David.
Mr. Ellington, President Ellington, and Council, thank you. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of IFF Local 109. I'm the President of the firefighters. In regards to what I assume is 19-33, it's a little confusing because it says resolution amending the manner of distribution and use of emergency medical transport unit. So I'm not sure, but what I'm speaking about is the change in the EMS billing money. So I'm assuming that's the right. It's just misworded. Is that possible?
Oh, transport revenue. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's supposed to be transport revenue.
And
Sorry to get good help.
obviously I've been up here before with my concerns of building a new station. Not that there's not a need for it, not that it's certainly needed for that community, but the plan to staff and equip it. And to date, I've really not heard a plan to staff and equip it. And what this legislation actually does is, out of that EMS revenue currently, there was $336,480 dedicated to staffing, salaries, as well as $84,120 to supplies. That is taken out and moved over to a general fund responsibility, and basically to move that money into a way of paying for Station 5. So certainly that continues to be a concern, as again, I'm not fighting the need for that station, but we need staffing. And we currently had money dedicated to staffing out of EMS billing. We're taking that away and dedicating it to a building. So that continues my concerns with public safety of how are we going to staff it. We had dedicated money for staffing, and instead they're taking that and putting it towards the building. So I wasn't available for the committee meeting. I was out of town, or I would address some of these sooner than tonight when you're coming to vote on it. But I stand opposed because of those reasons. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to go on to resolutions on the second reading, 19-31.
Resolution 19-31 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Raff, Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Labutus, and Mr. Lang. A resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Ohio Governor's Office of Criminal Justice Services for fiscal year 2019 Edward Byrne Justice Assistant Grant funding.
You've heard the second reading of 19-31. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr.
I
Marmee.
make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-31.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-31? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Raff?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
19-31 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 19-32.
Resolution 19-32 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mr. Raff, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, Mr. Labutus, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to apply for financial support from the state of Ohio 2019 Nature Works grant.
You've heard the second reading of 19-32. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-32.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee. Second. Second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 19-32? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Raff?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
19-32 passes 10-0. Next on the agenda on the second reading, we have 19-33.
Resolution 19-33 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Raff, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, Mr. Labutus, a resolution amending the manner of distribution and use of emergency medical transport revenue.
You've heard the second reading of 19-33. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Frazier?
I'll make a motion to adopt 1933.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Frazier.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lang. Is there any discussion on 19-33? Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this legislation, and thank you, Mr. McElfresh, for coming to the podium earlier to say your comments. I went back and watched the YouTube video of the Ways and Means Committee meeting of this on April 15th, and during the committee meeting, there wasn't any questions or any discussion during the meeting. So I believe it's important tonight that our stakeholders understand what this legislation is accomplishing. And it is changing the EMS formula so that more dollars go to the EMS and fire station to pay for the new fire station. And then, the administration did provide some spreadsheets to show those numbers from what currently is happening to what this proposal changes it to. So thank you for that information. And it does remove the dedicated lines of funding for the EMS medical supplies to the tune of $84,120. And it removes the dedicated line of funding for the fire uniform of $336,000 and $480. The passage of this legislation will now make those funding sources, which amount over $400,000, to be part of the general obligation of the Division of Fire. And my understanding is that this legislation is going to increase the general fund budget by that amount, $420,600. For the Division of Fire. I mean, that's what I understand in our conversations that we've had with the administration, and I've not been provided information as to how we will fund that increase in the general fund budget, but that is my understanding, is that this now is going to be an obligation of that, and we will meet those obligations. So, I just want to make sure it's clear what this legislation entails. Just want to make a few comments related to that. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Anyone else?
Yeah, Mr. President.
Mr. Frazier?
I'm in favor, and one of the net results that we see out of this is 1935, which is a purchase of another EMS transport in order to allow dedicated funding to continue our investments in our safety forces for capital improvements as well. When it comes to the $9 million or so that we have associated with the fire department, when it comes to these dollar amounts, we already have to pick up the tab for the vast majority of those funds out of the general fund and vis-a-vis the income tax that we're collecting. And so at the end of the day, I am in support of this. Not only does it further delineate where these funds are going to, the commitment that we have to continue to build the rainy day fund, as well as continuing to invest on what we need, what the real needs are for our community. So I do support this, and I do support the advent of a new fire station to help reduce response times and improve the welfare of people throughout the city. With that, I'll be over.
Anyone else? Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
and Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
1933 passes 10-0. Now we go on to resolutions on the first reading, 19-35.
Resolution 19-35 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to enter into a lease purchase agreement with Park National Bank for the lease purchase of one EMS transport medic unit for the Division of Fire.
19-35 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Next we have 19-36.
Resolution 19-36 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service for the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into a purchase agreement for the purchase of 4 police cruisers and 2 detective cars for the Division of Police.
19-36 will also be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting.
Point of order. It says 6 police cruisers and 2 detectives.
Sorry, it's right on the...
Yeah, I know.
That's okay.
Next we have 19-39.
Resolution 19-39 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang. A final resolution in cooperation with the ODOT for a project that consists of sidewalk reconstruction along the south side of Arlington Avenue between North Cedar Street and Heritage Middle School, including the addition/modification of curb, storm sewer, pavement, markings, and signage lying within the city of Newark and declaring an emergency.
19-39 is on its first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
make a motion to adopt 19-39.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath,
Second.
second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 19-39? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
and Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
19-39 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 19-40.
Resolution 19-40 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
19-40.
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on 19-40.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are some payouts that we need to pay out and also a couple bills that need to be expedited to make sure that we meet the deadline. So I ask that you expedite these.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
and Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived, Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to adopt Resolution 19-40.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any other discussion on 19-40? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
and Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
19-40 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 19-41.
Resolution 19-41 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to submit an application to the Ohio Department of Public Safety Office for federal fiscal year 2020 Ohio Traffic Safety Grant Programs, Selective Traffic Enforcement Programs, the Impaired Driving Enforcement Program, and Drug Drivers Enforcement Program.
19-41 will be held for 2 weeks to our second reading. Next, we have 19-42.
Resolution 19-42 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Lang, A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of municipal corporation.
19-42 will be held for 2 weeks for our next reading, our next meeting, which is June 3rd. And finally, we have 19-43.
Resolution 19-43 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Rath, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Lang. A resolution directing the application of increased gasoline and diesel tax revenues exclusively to paving projects.
And 19-43 will be held for 2 weeks for our next meeting. And that concludes our legislation tonight. Thank you for your attention. Next, we have our final opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, the same rules apply. Do we have anyone who would like to speak this section? Anyone from the administration? Director Baum.
We conducted active shooter training at Newark Catholic High School on the 15th. It was a huge success. I want to thank specifically firefighter paramedic Brandon Turner, Sergeant Al Schaefer, and Captain Alan Ashcraft for all the work they did putting this together and planning. It took a lot of work. They did a great job. And I also want to thank Beth Hill, her staff, and the students of Newark Catholic High School for their participation in allowing us to use their building. They were all in, and it showed. And Newark Public Safety is the better for it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the administration? We'll move on to miscellaneous. Auditor Johnson.
All pass.
Thank you. Law Director Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will pass.
Mayor Hall.
I will pass this evening.
Okay. Mr. Frazier.
Mr. President,
you gonna pass?
Get to go first. I think I'll speak. And so, thank you, Steve, for coming up and making us aware, and thank you for the notification too for the community, so that way everybody was aware what was going on there. There's no surprises, and it really is a good thing to get in there. I just want to highlight kind of the items that was in committee as well as what came before us today. We have about $1.2 million allocated this year for paving, with the gas tax that was on the agenda tonight that's coming forward for about another $1 million that's going to be allocated for paving. We also have a sidewalk improvement project on the agenda too. Both of those items are key infrastructure pieces that we've been highlighting, and it's a good thing to see the city and the administration investing in those parts of our government. The transport revenue, helping fund the EMS transport, helping fund the long-term objectives of the city is a great thing as well. And also previously with the committee, when it comes to the $30,000 in homelessness, I would just like to encourage the administration to come back to committee during the next session and bring that back forward with the revised number and the allocated commitment and the proposal, because I think that it's in our community's best interest to address that issue. It's just with some additional details and with the appropriate amount of money and the level of responsibility, I think it'll be a much smoother conversation, and everybody will be working from the same sheet of music. And so I also am excited for watching the video about the progress that has been made over the 4 years from the CIC and Newark Development Partners, and it's wonderful to be a part of this. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Ms. Hall.
Thank you. I will pass.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Labutus.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Director Baum and then also the Newark Police Department and Fire Department. I was able to attend the active shooter training Director Baum referenced a few moments ago. They did a fantastic job. I was proud to see both police and fire and our EMS services react so quickly and promptly. Also thank the Newark Catholic as well for their involvement and being able to host that training. It's something that I hope we never have to use, but it's good that it's practice, so if it does come into play, our forces know how to respond appropriately. And they did a fantastic job. So with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Mr. Lang.
Nothing for me tonight, Mr. President. Pass.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Mr. Marmee.
I need to call a Finance Committee meeting for 2 weeks from today, and with that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rath.
I'll call a service committee meeting, excuse me, for Monday, June 3rd, and with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to recognize the event that happened on Saturday on our courthouse, the Steps for Change. I thought that was very powerful, and I want to thank Jens in the audience and Newark Homeless Outreach put a lot of effort in making awareness to several issues that are occurring in our community, and That was, while I wasn't able to attend due to another event, I saw social media posts and it was very powerful. So thank you for your efforts and time and everything that you volunteered to do for that event. Then Saturday night, I also enjoyed dinner and some dancing with some of my colleagues, Mr. Koss, Mr. Fennell, and Mrs. Hall, and Mr. Lang were at the police ball. And so that ended the week, the police week celebration. They had their blue line celebration, or annual dinner that they have with the police and law enforcement. So that was fun. I enjoyed myself and it was a good time. And we've got some good pictures out of that. So, and I still owe Mr. Koss some money on that, but that's okay. Other than that, as a member of Kiwanis, I just want to say that the Strawberry Festival is coming up. So on that Saturday night, we will have fireworks, and so that's always a good time for our community, and look forward to seeing everybody there. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bub.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to recognize this evening the new scoreboard down at Don Edwards Park. I think some of fellow council members might have seen a picture of it today. It looks really good. It's a great improvement for down there for many other events other than just baseball. And, it was down at the park on Saturday, and I tell you what, we're really lucky as a city to have that. The place was just packed. It's about impossible to find parking down there. There was high school games going on, junior high games. It really looks nice down there, so I'll compliment the YMCA for their continued great partnership with the city. So with that, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Mr. Cost.
I would also like to congratulate Jen and Trish for Saturday morning, the homeless outreach, the race, the 5K, 1K, very successful and a very nice event. That will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. And Mr. Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. I will just add, our next committee and council will be next Monday, June 3rd, starting at 5:45. Council will start promptly at 7. City Hall will be closed Monday for Memorial Day, so if you have an opportunity, take an opportunity to thank a veteran for what they've done.
Mr. President, just a point of personal privilege. Mr. Kellen just recently graduated from Dennis University, so I want to recognize him for his graduation recently, so congratulations.
Well, very nice. Congratulations. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Claus, second by Mr. Labutus. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned at 7:21.